If someone is not familiar, feel free to like raise your hand, and someone else can probably define it. I'm pretty sure most people here are familiar with bugs and feature requests. So
bugs are just problems, feature requests are things that we want to change.
thanks, IMAX Blue. Yeah, that is correct. Bugs and feature requests. So a lot of rationality is about taking ideas from other disciplines and kind of using them to understand the human brain. In some sense, it's kind of like applied psychology or applied coxsci, where you try to think about the brain as something that you can interact with and use to your benefit. So instead of being like, the brain is like this weird like black box, right? So this is the brain, you don't know what's happening. It's like question mark, inputs, outputs. Rationality attempts to like understand like what makes the brain tick? How can we use it to achieve specific decisions? So to start with, like we're gonna do a fun exercise where I'm going to set a timer and you guys are gonna try and think of bugs and feature requests in your life. So a good way of doing this exercise is to, can you guys still see? On the left of a piece of paper or what have you, list bugs, and on the right, list feature requests. And yeah, just like for about 60 seconds, just like write down whatever comes to mind. We're not gonna quiz you on it, like it's just a way for you to get your thoughts out there. Great, looks like everyone's started. You can keep going. I'm just gonna be adding some prompts as you do this exercise. Now imagine a close friend or family member is peering over your shoulder. They're looking at your list. What do you think? Just try and visualize this person. The more specific, the better. What would they say is missing from the list? Like, does thinking of a specific person bring any features or bugs to mind? Now imagine a genie has offered to fix every bug you've written down and give you every feature you've requested. But there's just one caveat. Once the genie fulfills your wishes, your personality will be frozen. You will no longer be an evolving human being. You'll be stuck. So does that make you think of things that you want if you have this magical genie? It's gonna fix every problem and give you everything you desire. Cool. I'm just gonna keep on going. Next up, visualize your day. Does this bring up any new ideas? Like, think of specific things that are annoying. Like, is it troublesome to wake up in the morning? Like, I don't know, are you overeating maybe? Just try and deconstruct specific things and think of specific scenes in your mind where there's bugs or feature requests or potential. So far, we've kind of been like doing bugs and feature requests in a general way. I just want to get a sense, like, do you guys have like several points for both? Okay, that's great. So now I'm just going to like rapidly go through this section. Instead of thinking about general bugs and feature requests, I'm going to be listing specific areas of life and then just quickly jot down what you can think of. So number one, work/career. Bugs, feature requests. So basically what we did already, but except under a work/career header. So we're kind of just drilling down into specific areas. I'm just gonna keep on moving. Learning or curiosities, personal growth. Bugs on the left, feature requests on the right. Next up, family. Exercise. So some of these are probably going to trigger more bugs and feature requests than others, and that's completely okay. Food and diet. Sleep. Time management and scheduling. Hobbies. Friends. romance. Then there's like communications and social standing. What are things you currently feel like are missing? What are things you would want to get rid of? And then emotions and boundaries. Obviously, this isn't a comprehensive list, but I think it targets like a lot of areas of life. And I hope just by the process of like thinking about this basic prompt, you've like managed to articulate thoughts that were kind of unconscious. So yeah, like this was kind of a way of prompting our brain to tap into like things that may have been unconsciously known and kind of articulating it. So this is just one such exercise in rationality. So unfortunately, this is a original note from when I was attending the workshop and struggling to follow up to the guy who gave me like 10 seconds for every prompt. So it's kind of like comparing the evolution of rationality, if you will. So the reason we're comparing physics and rationality is because physics, like many physical sciences and domains, is something that we've built better and better models for over time. To begin with, we had like a crude understanding, like Aristotelian mechanics, way back in ancient Greece, and then over time, it was kind of replaced by Newtonian mechanics, and then like relativistic mechanics, quantum mechanics, and what have you. And right now, we're in a confusing phase, which I'm not a domain expert on at all, which things like string theory are trying to answer. But what this kind of illustrates is how models evolve over time, and models can be useful without being completely right. And rationality itself has also gone through a similar trajectory or pathway. So like the idea of heuristics, biases, and calibration, I think like, I'm pretty sure that rationality, that the kind of rationality that they talk about here is the field that was kind of started by Daniel Kahneman and Emil Tversky, where they started doing research. So they have like a bunch of popular books now, Systems 1 thinking, Systems 2 thinking, a lot of pop psychology that's been popularized. And then the Center for Applied Rationality, who did this talk that I'm building on now, then kind of took areas of research, academic research, and distilled them into concrete principles that people could think about. So this led to ideas like factoring, inner simulator, trigger action patterns or taps, and then they're also looking for like a unified theory, which I think is like what any, not even mature field, any field like kind of aims towards. I'm not sure what IDC stands for. I don't think it's I don't care. IFS is like internal family systems. But yeah, kind of like this is, if you look at the factoring, reductionism to taps part, that's kind of what we're going to be covering in this lecture. So we're going to be pretending that this is a semester-long course, and today is lecture 1. So week 1, you have heuristics, biases, calibration, that kind of thing. I think those are more easily accessible in the media, like if you read books like Thinking Fast and Slow, a bunch of other books. I think there's Michael Lewis's account of Kahneman, and yeah, just like in general, these are more accessible. And then you have some of the more interesting ideas developed by the Center for Applied Rationality. So like many things in effective altruism and rationality, even if some of the people coming up with these techniques, like sometimes like to have this veneer around them, they're actually pretty simple ideas. So yeah, that's what makes them practical and nice. So, okay, so the first thing we're going to be talking about is the idea of factoring. So this was supposed to be an orange, but in Windows the emoji is kind of weird, so it looks kind of weird. And the core concept in factoring is that things can be broken into parts. I realize I've been ranting for a while, so I'm going to bring in another interactive example. So one example that's pretty useful to think about, can you guys see when I move to the side of the room, or is it like harder?
So
It's
we
all
can
right?
see you.
Okay, cool. So goal factoring. Goal factoring is the idea of thinking about a goal you have and then breaking it down into specific things you're trying to get out of the goal. And I'm just going to ask for anyone who has like a goal they're working towards right now, right? Like I know, for example, Wasim is interested in AI safety upskilling. If there's anyone else who has something they'd like to volunteer as like a goal, then we're just gonna walk through that on the board so we have a better sense of what goal factoring is. Majad?
Get proficient with microcontrollers.
Okay, get proficient with microcontrollers. So, microcontroller proficiency. So proficiency isn't like a well-defined like term, but that's fine. We have a general sense of what that means. And this is a goal, right? So we've circled the goal. For any given goal, you have a set of inputs coming into the goal. And these inputs are what you have to put in to accomplish the goal, right? So what are some things that you need to invest? What are some, like, I'm just gonna give an example, right? Like time is one thing. What's something else? Just shout it out.
Money.
Yeah, time, money. Anything else?
Energy.
Energy, yeah. And that's like human energy, right? And what else?
Find mentors.
Find mentors, yeah. So like mentors or experts who can help you out. And this is kind of the input side of the equation, which is looking at how do I do this? So inputs, they kind of answer how, but what we're more interested in is understanding why we have this goal in the first place, right? So why would someone want to be proficient with microcontrollers? Maybe Madhav, if you have one idea.
I want independence. If I want to solve a problem, I just want to get it done myself.
Okay, yeah. So is that kind of like build things on my own?
Resourcefulness.
Resourcefulness. I like that. So resourcefulness, and as always, shout it out if you have any ideas. There's like many outputs that you can get, yeah?
Amusement.
Amusement, yeah.
Getting a job at IBM.
Yeah, that's like a more specific goal, but we can put that down. Getting a job at company X. Yeah, and you can keep on shouting things out. I will eventually catch up at company X. So yeah, these are like, so what we notice here is that there's like, if you just think about a goal in isolation, you're kind of just thinking about the goal. But then if you zoom out, you notice that it's like part of a pipeline. Like this is goal number I, and this is I minus one, and I plus one. It's never in isolation. And understanding like kind of the related or adjacent goals helps us understand if there's maybe a better way to accomplish what we're thinking of, right? So this is like an admirable goal, right? But what if maybe there's like alternative ways of achieving resourcefulness or amusement, right? Like, let's try and think of some other goals which could lead to like increased resourcefulness, like, or activities, right? So if you guys have any ideas, what are some other things that could lead to resourcefulness or amusement or getting a job at company X? I think this is actually the easiest example. So let's start with this, right? What are some other things you could do to get a job at company X? Where X could be Amazon, IBM.
Just practice selling in interviews.
Practice?
Selling interviews.
Studying and interviews? Yeah. Yeah, so practice selling yourself and interviews. I might be slightly misinterpreting it, but
That's correct.
okay. But yeah, the overall point remains regardless. So this could be another way of accomplishing the same thing. And the reason this is nice is because it helps you realize that sometimes we might think that we need a specific outcome to happen, right? But think about it this way, right? Let's say for you, money is a constraint, right? And that prevents you from working on microcontroller proficiency. And you're like, oh, I don't have money, so I can't build microcontrollers, and so I'm not as good as my peers, and I'm having trouble finding jobs. But what you're really looking for, if your main output goal is getting a job at company X, amusement and resourcefulness, you could accomplish the same thing with full stack proficiency. And with full stack proficiency, you already have a laptop, right? So in that case, you wouldn't need money. So hypothetically, if money were a constraint, this process of goal factoring helps you see that, oh, what I'm actually seeking with this intermediate goal is these outcomes, so maybe I don't need to be tied to this specific way. So in this way, like, thinking about goals as composable blocks of many specific outcomes that you're trying to seek helps you diagnose and improve on your goals and keep you like moving forward steadily. It's like a way of resourceful thinking, a way of being creative. So there's other things, right? Like the ideas of currencies, units of exchange, which is basically like a good example is like cooking, right? So if you cook at home, you usually get healthier food, you save on money, but then you have to invest like some time, and it's like a discrete block of time, right? It's not like you can cook in bits. You kind of can if you chop stuff, but in general, like you're sacrificing money, and so what you're gaining is healthiness, but you're sacrificing time. But on the other hand, if you buy pre-made food, it might not be as healthy, but damn, it's gonna be much easier. You won't have to spend time on it. So for yourself, you kind of have to think of like, what's the conversion ratio of dollars to time for me, right? And the thing to realize is that these ratios aren't constant, right? Like during exam week, this is going to be a particular value. Like it might make way more sense to spend money on food versus doing the rest of the term. So yeah, like a lot of these ideas, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not sure what aversion, factoring, or immunity, I think I do have a general idea, but yeah, we don't have time to cover everything in a day. This is supposed to take 3 weeks. But the key insight is to like break things down into components or buckets and then think about them in that way. So factoring, and this should explain the orange emoji. You are breaking, so the goal is kind of like an orange, but you're peeling the layers to reveal individual components. And yeah, that's kind of the idea. Now, I think we just kind of went on it on the board, so this isn't as relevant anymore. But yeah, if you think about this kind of thing too, right? Like, friend will be happy. Maybe if you're an extrovert who doesn't like introvert who doesn't like going to parties, you might be like, oh, instead of making my friend happy by going to a party, which I would be miserable about, what if I gave them a gift that showed my thoughtfulness, right? So this is another example. And yeah, I find it to be a pretty simple idea that you can apply anywhere, right? Like if you guys want, like what I was doing during the workshop was kind of like thinking of my own goals, and like scribbling on the iPad, which was kind of nice. And I guess this is somewhat adjacent, and it's the idea that a lot of times we have stated beliefs or stated preferences, which are like kind of the intellectual side of the brain, but a lot of other things aren't things that we consciously think about. They're just like something you instinctively feel. So if you're familiar with systems 1 versus systems 2 thinking, like there's a lot of overlap with that. Like if you see a lion in the woods, right? You don't have to conceptualize, you don't have to draw on your inner model of the world explicitly to be scared. You just are scared. So that's an A leaf. But a B leaf is kind of like the intellectualized or rationalized reason for why you fear it. So yeah, actually, this is like one of the many models in rationality. It's not quite related to factoring, but I'll allow it.
Is it like your intuition versus your like justification?
That's a good way of framing it.
Sorry, when you say like these things take weeks, is this like a formal course that's out there?
Oh yeah, so I should have clarified this. It's in the form of a handbook. I don't think there are any recorded versions of it right now, but the way this workshop was run at EAG Berkeley, he was like, okay, we're gonna pretend this is a semester-long course, and today is day 1. So yeah, I kind of wanted to like set that out up front. I kind of forgot, but yeah, this is like, we're pretending this is day 1 of a semester-long course. So next up, yeah, Wasim?
Well, I was just gonna say you can read more about it if you Google CFAR handbook.
Awesome, yeah. And also we're gonna be linking to resources on the Discord. So if you're not on the Discord, come talk to me or Wasim or Eden and we'll add you to the Discord. So yeah, we've finished weeks 1 to weeks 4. Now we're gonna be talking about inner simulator. So the inner simulator is the idea that we have an inner model of the world where things are just kind of visualized, right? Like it's not a model that we explicitly set out to build, but it's things like our instinctive understanding of physics, right? Which we've built up over time. So like if I drop my iPad, what's going to happen? Like if I just think that thought, there's like an instinctive visualization, and that reflects the model that you have in your mind. Or if you like slap your friend out of the blue, what's gonna happen? Like that kind of thing. Things that you would normally do, or maybe you shouldn't do. Like all of those things make up your inner simulator, and the core concept here is that of an inner world model. So I'm gonna talk about some of these examples. So one really actionable and nice insight here is the idea of shoulder advisors. So I think it's called shoulder advisor because it's a bit like the old trope of the angel and the devil. Oh, I'm sorry. I think a couple of minutes ago you had a question. Did I?
Oh yeah, no, it was very similar. It's just whether beliefs for like a priori reasoning. But, yeah.
Okay, yeah, my bad. But yeah, so shoulder advisors, right? Like, I feel like since a lot of people here in tech, like they probably read a lot of Naval tweets, right? So, like, imagine you're thinking of making a decision and you're not sure what the next approach is, and you need a mentor. So one way you could kind of think about alternative opinions is try to imagine, like Naval, what would he say given this situation? Or think of someone close to you, right? It can be your dad. Just imagine someone peering over your shoulder, and like, I think doing the voice in your head also helps of this person. And it's like a really simple way of kind of like imagining how different people would respond. It's kind of like a way of externalizing yourself from your specific dramas, because a lot of times in our own lives, right, we're the main characters, we build up dramas about like how things are bad, things are going to go wrong and whatnot, but kind of externalizing yourself in this way helps you separate yourself from this and instead think about the specific objective facts about a situation. So yeah, this is like a nice technique. And going back to the inner simulator, I didn't give like the best example. One example is how if you've driven a car, like you know that whenever something goes wrong, your instinctive first response, and this is trained over hundreds of hours of driving, is to slam on the brakes, right? That's kind of your inner world model. It doesn't have to be vocalized. But who here has driven on ice? What happens when you brake on ice? Yeah.
You don't stop.
Exactly. So even though you might know this intellectually, even though people might have warned you about it, the first time you were driving on ice, you probably instinctively went for the brakes. At least I did. And this just kind of shows how we have this inner world model, which despite not being externalized, like causes us to have specific guesses for how to do things. And that's also why we have this idea of training and out of distribution. Like in ML, if you train a model on a certain set of data, but then you're testing it on a real world scenario, that's like out of distribution, it's a similar thing. The people here are like math or STEMmy, so they like to use these terminologies for questionable reasons, but that's fine. The next idea is what I was kind of touching on with shoulder advisors, which is prompt development. So once you realize that the inner world simulator is an actual thing, then the really cool thing you can do is you can start interacting with it, right? You can start prompting it the way you would talk to ChatGPT, which is like kind of why you're able to conjure like a shoulder, like probably you don't want to shoulder Elon Musk. So I'm trying to think of someone good that you would want. I don't know. Mother Teresa. If anyone has ideas, feel free to shout them out.
Kazin.
Thank you. Yeah, like prompts. So you can prompt your own brain. So this is kind of like one of the really cool insights from Inner Simulator. So once we're done, there's another really cool example actually. Murphy Jutsu, was this Inner Simulator? Yeah, so this is also super cool, right? This is like, think about, okay, let's say you're setting a goal. Like I am going to study for the next 2 hours. And what this does is it kind of primes you for the worst case scenario. Like you're asked to imagine that the plan fails, right? So given that the plan failed 2 hours from now, what do you think is the most likely reason that it failed, right? Any ideas? Like, has this ever happened to anyone? And so, yeah?
Couldn't focus, for example, if it was.
Yeah. So the reason this is really cool is because it kind of preemptively assumes, okay, we might fail. And in this failure scenario, how surprised would I be? So this is a way of checking your own probability model of different scenarios, right? Like, they term it a surprise-o-meter, which is like a cute way of thinking about it. So like, are you surprised when it turns out the plan failed? And then what you try to do now that you've come up with this idea that you're going to fail is you try to do pre-hindsight. Like you try to think of a plausible narrative of what kept you from succeeding, right? Was it because you are the kind of person who like doesn't study 2 hours in a row, like the most you study is 1 hour? Is it because you happen to be hanging out with your friend and they wanted to play Tetris? So now that you have hindsight, step 4 is bulletproofing, right? Like, what single action can you take to head off the failure mode your inner sim predicts? So I know they say single action, and I guess that's like, what's one really important thing you could do to prevent that from happening? So one thing I can think of is like being in an environment where you're not distracted. Another thing I can think of is like, I don't know, at least for studying, I find that when I'm procrastinating, it's because I don't have like a concrete priority of what things to work on, and that's why my mind is fluttering. So yeah, just like, I think like introspecting is good. And then you just iterate on steps 2 to 4 until you've kind of figured out, oh, okay, now I'm pretty sure that I won't fail. So obviously, this is like kind of comprehensive. Oh, sorry, Munda?
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, Jonathan.
Okay, yeah, I'll just finish and then I was just going to say that for something as trivial as studying in 2-hour blocks, this might be too involved, but especially for larger goals, like, oh, I'm going to try out machine learning by working at this company, because use goal factoring to figure out why, and then you can kind of make sure that you don't invest a lot of time and energy into things without coming up with a robust, like, worst case scenario. Yeah.
I wanted to highlight that this is a simplified version of this is really good for risk taking and like how we advance with our careers. One thing
Yeah, you
is,
can come
you mentioned TPS to me like 10 minutes ago. This is one of the things we do. We just have like, that's not useful. We just have 2 steps, which are trying to figure out like what is the worst case scenario that is realistic, and then what could you do to prevent that. And we just keep going over those 2 steps again and again.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, when it comes to careers especially, like people are often intentionally going into the worst case outcome for them. So the worst case outcome for a bunch of you know, at this prestigious university is you get an average job, maybe at a startup that doesn't pay so well, maybe at a non-profit that doesn't pay so well, but it's really not too bad. But what people end up doing is like, because they haven't planned out, you know, what could really go wrong and how might I mitigate that, they head straight into that option. They're like, okay, you know, this is kind of realistic, this is what I have to fall back on, let me just go do that first. And so that's what our directives were talking to us about, is that why would you go do that first? You know, if that's the worst case thing, do that last, and that's what you fall back on. So for example, for any of you here, like let's say that's the realistic worst case scenario, is you work at a average startup.
Canada startup company.
Yeah. Well, average, you know, that's a worst case scenario, because like for most of you you're aiming like, okay, big tech, Google, whatever. So let's say that happens, you don't have such a high paying job, maybe the task you're working on, they don't lead to much growth. You might ask, what leads to this and how might I prevent that? So maybe like one of the things is you're not switching jobs enough, you're not looking for what else could I learn. So if that's one of the issues, then one of the answers of how you might prevent that would be, okay, let me try out a lot of different industries first to make sure I can find one where I can grow a lot. So things like a co-op program might be good, where you switch every 6 months. Once you've done that, you repeat, like, okay, if I do that, I know I can do that, right? Like you just identify that. If I make that change happen, what's the new worst case scenario? And maybe like now you're like, okay, I'm still learning a lot, I'm just not making enough money to donate, so, you know, good. startup, whatever. I'm being very vague right now, but like you could again ask, okay, if that's the next worst case scenario, what could I do to prevent that? If I did that, then what would be the new worst case scenario? And you end up at your best worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
This is important because, like, especially in EA, what I find is a lot of people, they're not taking enough risks. Because you have to understand, like, what we were talking about with effective self, which is you have to start small, but you do have to aim big. And you recognize that right now, like in this room, rationally, we're not having much impact. So we have to aim high. And this is something I've seen all too much of people not being willing to take risks, of people just being like, okay, what's the average expectation? Don't do that. Do that as a backup. And that might for you look like, okay, working at an EA organization, okay, that's the average outcome, but do that as a backup. What's the best scenario that you could aim for first? Do that, and then, you know, work your way back as the events unfold.
Mm-hmm. Like maybe start your own EA work.
That could be an example, but it doesn't need to be, right? Like, it's not about just chasing status, it's about a personalized reflection. Like, what is your worst case scenario? What could you do to mitigate that? Where do you end up after? And like these things, they should be clear enough that you can just do them. You know, they make sense. Sorry.
No, thanks. Yeah, I think that gives like a good model of thinking about like how to iterate on Murphy Jutsu. And one other thing is like the reason it's called Murphy Jutsu, one second, I'm coming to you, is because it's like Murphy's Law, right? Like, which is like the day that you have to print your 100-page thesis is the day the printers, all of them in DP, are gonna stop working. So this is kind of like a generalization of that, and it's kind of like taking that law and deciding to wield it as a weapon. And yeah, sorry, what was your question?
Sorry, no more comment on whether the risk balance in EA is currently correct.
Oh
Depends
yeah.
a bit on whether you believe Sam Bankman-Fried on whether he was actually interested in taking a high risk gamble or whether this was a personal benefit thing, but maybe you might want to temper a little the claim that we're not taking enough risk.
Yeah, let's wait for further info on the SBF thing. Okay, I'm not too sure where he stands on being EA. Oh, did you have something?
I was mainly talking about individuals,
Yeah, okay.
not on a high level, like what is the entire movement doing?
Yeah.
Day to day, what are we doing right now in this room?
Yeah, and Eden.
Yeah, I think like what he said, like I think it summed it well, like really well. Like you're converging to the best worst case scenario by just iterating
Yeah,
through Murphy
best
Jitsu.
worst case scenario. That's like a really good
Yeah.
way of putting it. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad people really liked weeks 5 to 6 inner sim. And finally we have weeks 7 to 8, which is kind of going over trigger action patterns, or TAPS for short. So trigger action patterns are basically like if-then statements, right? It's like ways of associating like an intention you have with a specific outcome. So we'll come to like examples in a bit, but again, this is like the idea of engaging with your inner simulator and querying your mind, which is how it ties into things like CBT. Also spaced repetition, which is like a way of kind of externalizing learning by using flashcards. So implementation intentions, right? Let's think of some examples of those. Okay, wait, okay, we can split that slide. So the reason implementation intentions are important is because they help us understand, like, they help us stay on track with our goals. So up here, the dotted line is the happy outcome, but the other line, the actual line, is like an unhappy outcome. And this could be something like being healthy by going to the gym consistently, and you were doing really well for like 12 weeks, but then one small thing happened and that kind of cascaded. But imagine if you could have stopped at that point in time when it was just about to veer off track. So this is kind of what we're trying to solve with implementation intentions. It's like cultivating intentionality about the way we approach our goals. So the normal way we do things, right? Like humans respond to cues. again, this is like our system one acting up. If someone sneezes, you don't like do some calculus. Should I say bless you? But no, they didn't bless me last time. Or like anything, you just say bless you, right? It's kind of been programmed into you by some kind of conditioning. And let's say you have some snacks in front of you, you're just gonna grab the snack. Again, like lots of things that are kind of like human behavior. If then patterns, if you notice. Like you hear a notification, you pull out your phone, and yeah, like these are taps by default. These aren't taps that we consciously engineered a lot of times. They're just taps that we kind of fell into. And the problem with taps that we fell into is that they're kind of like traps because they're not achieving what we're trying to achieve a lot of times. So what we want instead is to make trigger action patterns or plans that are very intentional, that are well designed. So one example is like if you want to eat healthier, right? Grab, like when you hold your shopping cart, you could like put yourself into the habit of asking whether this is a healthy shopping trip or a regular one. To be honest, I don't think this is a great example because I think I'd struggle with remembering this kind of thing. But the other thing to notice is that